So getting back to our color harmonies, here we've got our RYB color wheel. We've got red, yellow, and blue. You'll also notice that our colors are desaturating as we get closer to the center. The color combination that's going to give us the most contrast here is our complementary harmony. So let's start here with our blue on one side and our orange on the other side. You'll notice that in order to keep this scheme pretty balanced or to maintain our equilibrium, we've got to use equal amounts of each color so our wheel doesn't tilt to one side of another. If we scoot this over a little bit, you'll notice that our wheel starts to tilt in this direction, and the further over we get, the more of a tilt we're generally getting. So again, in order to keep this balanced, we've got to keep these pretty much directly across from each other here. So one way we can mitigate this instability if we have something shifting a little bit to one side or the other, or if we want to reduce our contrast, is we can play with reducing saturation of our colors. So we can actually take our colors and bring them closer to our middle here. And that way, if one of these shifts a little bit one way or another, you'll notice we won't have nearly as strong of a tilt in one direction here because they're kind of towards the balance point, the point of equilibrium. So we can get away with a little bit more color-wise when we have our saturation decreased. Another way we can reduce contrast with complements but maintain those bright saturated hues that we like, so coming back out here, is we can play around with anchoring the center with a lot of neutrals. So if I just take a bunch of weight and I throw it right smack dab in the middle here, it's going to be less wobbly. We can move these around a little bit more. We can play with saturation a little bit. And again, because we have a lot of that neutral in the middle, we've got a little bit more flexibility to play around with colors at the edges. It's going to keep us anchored. It's going to keep us balanced. And now real quick, I just want to show you the difference between all these options on the screen here. So let's take a look at this image. So we've got a sort of random array of complements in various saturations with red and green. So in some areas we've got our fully saturated red directly adjacent to fully saturated green. Here we've got desaturated red next to desaturated green. We've got saturated red or saturated green next to gray, et cetera, in various permutations. So just a lot of different variations on saturation of a complement sort of mixed around in no particular order. So if your eye's like mine, it's going to sort of globally feel okay because we've got roughly the same amount of red and green, but my eye doesn't quite know where to focus because it's bouncing around a little bit. It's going from the saturated areas to the desaturated areas and then back again to more saturated areas. If we look at this checkerboard here with orange and blue, we've actually got a really nice gradual uniform gradient going from one color to its complement. And you'll probably notice how our eye travels sort of in one direction. It's not skipping all over the page and it's not nearly as chaotic. So we'll also see if we take our blue-orange graphic here and we cut it in half, so we're just looking at gray to orange, and then let's compare it to this little segment here where we've got red directly next to our neutral gray. You'll notice that the red-gray combo is much higher contrast because although our beginning and end colors are the same and maybe even the distance between them is the same, one is just made of one giant step between the neutral and the highly saturated color, and the other one transitions in much smaller, less contrasty increments. Now, neither of these applications are right or wrong, and in fact, we can use neutrals to increase perceived saturation of a color by placing a neutral directly adjacent to that color. But I want to give you guys an understanding of how we transition between one color and another is important and affects our contrast. And this also goes for transitioning between all colors, not just neutrals. Okay, so getting back to our pure hue harmonies here, another way we can stabilize our complementary color harmony a bit is we can split actually one side of our complement into two sides. So what that means is we're going to take this guy and we're going to slide it over here, and we're going to add another color here. So now instead of just the blue, we've got sort of a green blue and we've got a purple blue, and that's directly opposite our orange. And you'll notice that when we do that is we still get a little bit of a tilt in this direction because now we've got sort of twice the weight on this side as we do on that side. So in order to make this more balanced, we'll have to add more weight over on our orange side. And you'll notice that once we do that, we're much more balanced and we've got basically the same amount of weight on this side as we do on this side. So we talked about reducing saturation of both colors for the complementary scheme to reduce contrast, but alternatively we could play around with just bringing one color down in saturation. So for instance, if we wanted to, we could take our orange and we could bring it down in saturation here. But again, you'll notice that everything has kind of a tilt in this direction because we've shifted our balance of equilibrium to somewhere around here. And we want it to be, again, at the center point. So we'll just keep adding a little bit more weight to our desaturated orange. And basically what that means is we just need more of it. And so you can see as we add more and more weight there, we're going to get something that is a little bit more balanced. All right, so for our next color harmony, we can manipulate our existing one a little bit, and we can slide our orange back out so we've got something saturated again. We can take off some of our weight, a little bit more weight here so we're even and balanced out again. And we can just do what we did on this side on our other side. So instead of our orange just being the sole color, we can take this out to red orange and to yellow orange. And this is basically our split complementary color scheme. So we've got much more stability in this direction because now we're not dealing with just one complementary color pair, but two. And so having this extra area out here really makes this a much more stable color scheme than our normal complementary color scheme. One thing before we move on to our next color harmony that I want to touch on here that was a bit of a revelation for me when it first clicked in my mind is that this is actually a combination of two color harmonies. So we have one complementary color scheme here, we've got another one here, and we're adding them together. So this is something that I like to keep in the back of my mind when I'm editing an image that has maybe a more complex color palette. Maybe it has more hues than just the three primaries, for instance. We can build up those color harmonies in layers and layer them in an image, and we'll talk about this a bit in the retouching segment, but just something to keep in the back of your mind that allows you a little bit more flexibility. Ultimately, we're trying to maintain this balance. One way we can make this four-color harmony situation really stable is we can take all of our colors and push them out a little bit so they're now equally distributed around our color wheel. So basically we can shift this guy here and this guy here. And now we've got colors in each corner of our color wheel. Everything is very equally spaced out. It's very stable in this direction. It's really stable in this direction. And what you can do is you can start manipulating saturation of some complements here, and it's still going to be very stable because, again, you've got these opposing forces here. You could even play around with adding even more color in a certain area. So for instance, if you wanted to add more desaturated purple and desaturated yellow here, again, we're kind of maintaining that overall balance because these are sort of interacting in separate ways. Going to our next color harmony, we'll pull these guys out again. Maybe remove some of our color weight here. And what we'll do is we'll take one of these out and redistribute so that all of our colors, again, are equally spaced around the color wheel, but we're down to 3. And this is our triadic color harmony. You'll notice that we're on red, yellow, blue, which is our primary color harmony. We can also switch it up to our orange, purple, and green color harmony. One thing that's worth mentioning here is that our red, yellow, and blue harmony is the most contrasty one, and this is due to the fact that our yellow has the highest inherent luminosity value, our blue has the lowest, and our red is somewhere in between. So we've got not only a range of color contrast, but we also have a fairly high luminosity contrast. Let's take a minute to quickly recap here. We've got our complementary color harmony, our split complementary, our double split complementary, quadratic, and triadic harmonies, all of which are designed to work when we can create this stability and balance all around the color wheel. But sometimes we're not actually looking for balance. Let's take a look at our analogous color harmony, for instance. So if we take these guys and slide them a bit closer around the wheel here, and now it's very obvious that we're tilting in one direction. We're creating this whole shift towards this side of the color wheel. And the intent here is not to create balance, but it's to kind of skew our perception in one particular direction to evoke a certain type of emotional response, for example. Our analogous color scheme works for the same reason that using smaller gradations between saturated and unsaturated color works. We're employing colors that have small, subtle transitions between them. I mean, we can move these in even further here. And we're transitioning from one color to the next in small, subtle increments. And so it gives it a very nice, subtle contrast. We can also take these guys out entirely. And we're left with our monochromatic concept. And our monochromatic concept works typically with having a more saturated color and then just using variations on that and decreasing saturation and using kind of variations on tints and tones for that one particular color. So I spent a lot of time discussing the concept of balance and stressing that we need to have equilibrium in order to have a pleasing visual experience. But we can also choose to employ imbalance in a really deliberate way. So for instance, if we want to draw attention to a particular part of an image, we can employ the use of a color that upsets the balance of the color wheel so that our eye can't help but look there because it's sort of unexpected. Or perhaps our subject matter is meant to make the viewer more uncomfortable, in which case our color discord may be something we're really striving for. But once we've got a grasp of the principles and an understanding of contrast, we can really start to employ or to break these rules of balance in an effective and meaningful way. Purple is the deepening of pink, transforming it from the sweet and feminine to the seductive and erotic. It is the color of the feminist and the queer, a color that celebrates and liberates the oppressed by blending the feminine pink and the masculine blue. Purple is the color of the royal and the wealthy, of artificiality, vanity, extravagance, and the unobtainable. Purple is the color of spirituality and alternate reality, the color of spiritual enlightenment, an escape from reality into the realm of fantasy, science fiction, magic, and mystery. Purple's association with mystery and spirituality was likely reinforced by the creation of LSD packaged in purple pills. It is the color of the imagination, creativity, and the psychedelic experience.